Good evening. I have a brief but happy role to play, which is to welcome you to Civility in Suburbia, the first civility lecture we've held here at the Harry Bennett branch. My name is Nick Bocchiccio. I'm the finance director for the library, and I'm going to simply introduce Joe Pisani, who's going to introduce our guest.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you, everybody, for coming out. It's a change of venue and a change of time, but you're loyal to us, and we appreciate that. As he said, this is our Civility in America series. We have a special guest tonight, one of the foremost corporate executives in America, David Sokol. But the thing about David, and I realized this after having read his book and having read a number of things about him, is that a large part of his discussion, he touches on things we haven't touched on in this series at all for the past 5 years, and it has to do with parenting and the role that parents play in raising a child to be civil, to be a decent human being with integrity. Of course, the topic tonight, he'll touch on politics, and he's also going to touch on American life. You've probably heard him mentioned David Sokol is the owner and CEO of Teton Capital, and he served as the chairman of Johns Manville, the chairman and CEO of NetJets, and director of BYD Company Limited. From 1991 to 2011, he was the chairman of Mid-American Energy Holdings Company. Before that, he was chief executive officer of a billion-dollar corporation, Ogden Projects. 2 years later, he took the management reins as chairman, president, and chief executive of Cal Energy Company. At the time, it was a small energy company operating a single geothermal power plant in the emerging renewable energy sector. Through acquisitions, Cal Energy became Mid-American Energy Holdings Company. In 2000, in an unprecedented move, the publicly traded company went private and was acquired by an investor group, including Berkshire Hathaway. Under David's leadership, the 17,000 employees of Mid-American grew the company into a leading global energy provider with 7 million customers, $41 billion in assets, and revenues exceeding $12 billion. That's quite an achievement. Today, Mid-American, through its utility subsidiaries, has interests in diversified generation facilities that can produce more than 21,000 megawatts of electric power. About 25% of that power comes from non-carbon renewable resources such as geothermal, wind, and nuclear. David's a leading proponent of establishing an Apollo-like program to fund and research development technology that would respond to global climate change. He's even presented models for this type of energy to Congress and different business groups. David's very active in community and charitable activities and places a great deal of emphasis on mentoring students. He's especially proud of his service on the Horatio Alger Association, of which he's the immediate past chairman. Join me in welcoming David Sokol.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you all for taking a few minutes to come and listen a little bit about some thoughts on civility at a time when it's kind of hard to come by. I'd like to thank the Dillenshire Group, the Hearst Media Group in Connecticut, and the Ferguson Library for sponsoring what I think is an invaluable series on civility in America, and for allowing me to be part of it. I'd like to start this evening by talking about where I come from, literally, because that is crucial, I think, in explaining how I think about civility. My values are deeply rooted in where I grew up and how I was brought up. I was born in Omaha, just outside of Omaha, Nebraska in 1956, the youngest of 5 brothers and sisters. My parents had been married for 20 years by the time I was born, and my oldest siblings were 19 years older than me. So as you can imagine, there were times when it seemed like I had a lot more than 2 parents. That had good and bad sides to it, of course, but growing up in a loving, nurturing family taught me many important lessons about caring for others. My father was the son of a Polish immigrant, and he had fought in World War II, so he was a 100% believer in America. He always tried to emphasize the positive side of life and was certain that if you applied yourself in this country, you could do anything. I was raised with that philosophy and have never stopped agreeing with my father on that. On weekends, it was his habit to go through the newspaper looking for articles that would inspire the family. We were all expected to sit together at dinner at precisely 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoons, while my father asked us to read aloud the stories that he had circled. They were always about some local businessman who had gone from rags to riches, or maybe about someone who had given money to help solve someone else's problems. He instilled a belief in us that we could do great things, we could do the great things that we read about in the paper. And in doing so, I firmly believe he instilled in us the building blocks of civility, a respect for ourselves and a respect for others. But part of that respect, as counterintuitive as this may sound at first, is that he would never do your job for you. My dad believed that good judgment came from experience, a lesson I learned from him when I was about 10 years old and quite desperate to build a go-kart. Dad encouraged me to earn the money to buy the parts, the 4 wheels, the axles, the steering wheel, lumber, and so on. So once I'd had them all assembled, I figured he'd help me build it. Not a chance. I'm not going to do it for you, he said. So I did it myself, put this go-kart together, but frankly the results were a little disappointing. By the time I got about 10 feet down the hill on the first test run, the front wheels came off and several other parts broke. I was a bruised and deeply disappointed young man. But as I turned around dragging part of the go-kart back up the hill, my dad appeared. So what do you think went wrong? And he then spent ample time showing me and helping me understand what the problems were and how to fix them. First, I had to show that I cared enough to try, then he was ready to pitch in. And it was a great lesson in really how to help people, a great lesson in helping show what true caring really is. My mother was just as important an influence. She was a loving, traditional mom who always made our mom's home comfortable and welcoming to others. She was the kind of mother who had warm cookies waiting for you when you came home from school. I attended Catholic grade school in an inner city public high school. And like my siblings, I was urged to go to college. My parents were in no position to pay for 5 college educations, so we were expected to work our way through school, which was fine because my father insisted that you learn a lot from a hard day's work. I found out the truth of that at the age of 11. My mother was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I went to work to help out with the expenses. Over the years, as a paper boy, a golf caddy, a janitor, a maintenance manager in an apartment complex, and I helped local farmers bale hay in the summer. In high school, I started out as a bagger at a local grocery store, and in less than 2 years, as a night manager. The job turned out to be a real blessing because after I entered the University of Nebraska at Omaha, I was able to live at home, go to school during the day, and work at night and weekends in the store. The blessing went far beyond the salary and the schedule-friendly hours. The store was run by a man named Abe Baker, who owned a chain of grocery stores, and his organization was a meritocracy. The harder you worked, the faster you were promoted. What's more, they paid part of your college tuition if you kept your grades up. And most importantly, you learned a lot about running a business, especially how to deal with customers. On that score, Abe Baker taught me a lifelong lesson. It started one evening when I was called up to the checkout counter where a woman was trying to return about a quarter pound of fat, claiming it was from a 10-pound roast that she insisted was no good. I recognized her immediately. I knew she had made exactly the same claim every week for the past several weeks. Demanding her money back even though she was clearly not telling the truth. I explained as politely as I could that we couldn't give her a refund this week, and that just sent her storming out of the store. A week later, Abe Baker called me into his office and asked about the incident. Of course, I explained my reasoning, feeling confident that he would agree and would support my decision. No such luck. Just the opposite. Abe's response was to hold up a copy of the store motto, which read, "The customer is always right." And then he said, "David, I know she was lying. She's been doing it for years. But the other customers who heard you don't know that. They just knew that our slogan doesn't mean a damn thing. It had never dawned on me that the other people that might hear that conversation and that I didn't realize, notwithstanding my intentions, they heard something different. I was sending out an unacceptable message about Baker Supermarket. Lessons learned. Since that day, I've never, ever taken customer interaction for granted. Now, while I was at the University of Nebraska in Omaha, I was playing football. I've been on my high school team, and I even had dreams of using the game as a career. The reality in Nebraska, it didn't take very long for football and I to realize we weren't made for each other. Probably a good thing as well, since by the end of my junior year, I was married and living in a trailer with my wonderful wife, Peggy. By the time I graduated in 1978, we had a child on the way. And let me just interject at this point that I consider Peggy one of the mothers of the century. So at that point, my main goal in life was to get my salary above my age. Fortunately, I landed a job with an engineering company and was on my way. As my career developed, I realized that everything I'd been taught while I was growing up, both at home and on the job, was helping to shape my views about how to operate successfully in the business world. And the starting point was this: pay attention to other people and their needs. Let me illustrate that in a little more concrete terms, because after we started Mid-American Energy in 1991, I laid out 6 primary beliefs to our employees. And in their simplest form, let me summarize them. A customer commitment, an employee commitment, and we always act with integrity, and we will maintain financial strength in the organization, always respect the environment, and it will balance all of those with what we call operational excellence. Please note the first 2, a commitment to customers and a commitment to employees. What I was telling my company is that the first priority, both in internal and external relations, is considering others and paying attention to their concerns. Now, everyone knows that companies always say they put customers first, and they always say their workers are their greatest asset. Sounds good, but do they mean it? And if they do, what does it look like in the real world? Well, what I think is that the commitment to customers means, first of all, that you do exactly what you say you do. You keep your promise to deliver high-quality product or service at a fair price and in a safe manner. It means knowing your customers, their needs and their opportunities. It means watching for trends in your industry so you can constantly fine-tune your service. It means being reliable, delivering on time, and doing a job correctly the first time. It means providing early warnings about potential changes, like price increases. In short, it means always treating your customer as you would want to be treated in the same circumstance. If you put yourself in your customer's shoes, it's basically civility at work. When it comes to employees, the commitment requires a serious, honest dedication on management's part to things like safety, training, compensation, benefits, and performance. It's not about policies that feel good, but ignore the real interests of the individual. Genuine employee commitment requires candor and a very serious investment of time by your managers. And it has to be a two-way street. Employees have the right to expect fair compensation and benefits, proper training and support, a safe work environment, candid assessments, and equal opportunity. But by the same token, the company has the right to expect fully engaged employees who execute their responsibilities thoroughly and conscientiously, who are honest, who comply with the company's policies, and who work in a safe and cooperative manner. I apply the same sort of principles in dealing with the world beyond our company. I believe in being earlier on time for appointments, in being courteous to people, in being respectful of others' time and their views, and in being honest and candid in our communications. As I said, it's all about civility. Now, if you're like me, and I suspect you are, you're looking at what's happening in American politics and feeling a strong sense of shock and dismay. Civility, courtesy, and reasoned debate have been replaced by shouts, insults, and unimaginable vulgarity in our nation's political conversation. I'm reminded of a lifelong Republican from Florida who was interviewed on national radio recently. The idea of breaking with this party pains him deeply. But when it comes to the candidate who's leading all this vulgarity, He said, and I quote, "I'd rather vote for a tree stump." I think we all know who he's talking about. Now, let me be clear. I'm a registered Republican who tends to be fiscally conservative and socially moderate in my views. But from where I stand, the breakdown of civility is not a Republican or a Democrat issue. It is something that has affected all of our society, and it will take all of us to bring civility back. It's not just the politicians who have a problem with civility. The media that cover them, people and organizations that are our chief sources of information about the candidates, have some serious responsibilities as well. Yes, we all know the Constitution guarantees a free press, and that's very important in a system like ours, where informed citizenry is necessary for us to have a successful democracy. But freedom is not the same thing as a license to do whatever you want to do. The government cannot and should not impose restraints on the media's conduct, except, of course, in matters of national security. But with freedom comes responsibility. And so along with constitutional protection, the press has a responsibility to show some restraint. Or to put it in the context of this lecture series, an obligation to promote civility by displaying a sense of civility itself, and by not allowing the end to justify the means. Unfortunately, and with increasing frequency, the opposite seems to be happening. Here's a case in point. Later this month, HBO is going to broadcast a made-for-TV movie about the Senate confirmation hearings for Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. If you're not familiar with those hearings, which took place in 1991, 25 years ago, or if you've forgotten the details, they can be fairly described as one of America's most divisive, nasty, and destructive episodes in our history. I knew nothing about Clarence Thomas when President George H.W. Bush nominated him to replace the late Thurgood Marshall. But I was struck at the time by what a talented nominee he seemed to be. And I remember thinking it was a great day. I thought, you know, a white Republican president is proposing a black lawyer in the highest court in the land. While I knew Thomas would not be the first black justice Marshall held that honor, I felt his nomination was a genuine measure of our progress in our society. Then the confirmation hearings began, and I was shocked at the way Thomas was attacked, not on his resume, not about his life's experiences, but on a personal basis. It was simply character assassination, or as Thomas said at the time, a high-tech lynching. Rather than challenge his legal philosophy or educational credentials, which would have been fair game, his opponents tried to destroy his character with half-truths, lies, and innuendo. They attacked Thomas with virtually no evidence to support their accusations. In fact, the accusations appear to have been fabricated merely for the use in that hearing. It was clear that having no honest objection to Clarence Thomas, they chose to attempt to destroy his confirmation by destroying his reputation. In their view, the end justified the means. Their tactics fascinated the press, but it made me sick to watch such a fine man treated in such an unfair way. This, I believe, was the beginning of our society's loss of civility at the highest level. Honest discussion about a person's resume, experience, qualifications, or philosophy began being replaced by lies, innuendo, distortions, and outright personal attacks. The decay has continued and deepened to a point where presidential candidates and their surrogates actually feel quite free to trade insults like liar, stupid, con man, and as you know, much worse. They've been doing this with almost completely ignoring a $19 trillion national debt, a $500 billion annual deficit, a miserably weak economy, looming shortfalls in entitlement funding, national security, and our failing educational system. And frankly, it's disgraceful. I believe that many of us are at fault for this long-term decay, and that we did not speak up when such improper tactics were used against individuals who we may not agree with. In other words, you and I were okay with the end justifying the means when we agreed with the end. We must oppose this process, whether or not we like the individual or the policy that is being challenged. because I believe that true character is treating those you disagree with fairness and courtesy. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I should tell you that my wife and I, many years past that confirmation, got to know Clarence Thomas and his wife, and we've become close personal friends. I should also tell you that I've seen a copy of the script of this HBO movie, so I know how it treats both Clarence Thomas and his accusers. But importantly, my objection is not based on my personal friendship with the justice and his wife, nor frankly on the film itself or its content, or frankly, the make-believe views that are portrayed in it. My objection is to the fact of the movie itself. Simply put, it's an unnecessary, unwanted incitement at a critical time in American life. It's like throwing gasoline on a raging fire. Its intention is to further the false impression that was created in the original confirmation circus 25 years ago. And all of this falls on the heels of the hundreds, if not thousands, of hateful blogs, emails, and letters that have been directed at Justice Thomas following the death of Anthony Scalia. Can anyone really say that they were on the edge of their seat waiting for this movie? Or, as HBO has now, after it's been challenged, has said, oh, this is an important tale about sexual harassment in the workplace. Well, if that's the case, let's ask ourselves which episode in recent history is a better topic for that movie. A confirmation hearing in which one woman claimed, without any independent corroboration, that 9 years earlier, Thomas made a statement that she interpreted as sexual harassment. Or should it be a movie about a real case of sexual misconduct in the workplace when President Bill Clinton seduced a 21-year-old intern in the Oval Office? That was the most egregious example of sexual harassment in the workplace in the history of our country. And interestingly, Anita Hill, on Meet the Press, came to the defense of Bill Clinton. Which movie should be made? In my opinion, neither one, especially not in the middle of this overheated election year. We witnessed both of those events. HBO's film, Confirmation, runs the risk of opening an unfortunate and inappropriate wound, raking up still more racial animosities and pushing the nasty national mood further in the wrong direction by legitimizing such character assassination. They once again support the end justifying the means and are concurrently encouraging its use in the misguided hope that they can get a Supreme Court justice to resign. As I said, the Constitution may guarantee freedom of the press, and that's good, but it does not relieve HBO of a civic duty. It knows what's going on. It knows the script is a fantasy, and that should be enough to convince it to be socially responsible. We Americans need to demand more of our media and of our political leaders and of ourselves. We can and should discuss the presidential candidates' policy positions and personal qualifications, but we shouldn't tolerate it when they deploy reckless personal attacks, gross distortions, and outright lies. We must demand that they meet a higher standard of conduct, whether we like them or not. We must demand more of ourselves. We need to raise our own standard by insisting on courtesy and civility, even when we disagree. Simply put, we need to learn once again how to disagree without being disagreeable. All the lessons I've been taught in my life and in business, the examples my parents set, to the lessons employers gave me, to the standards I've tried to set for our own organizations, they've taught me the value of personal respect and civility towards others. Whatever success I've enjoyed in life is built on those principles, and I firmly believe they are among the most important things that make our nation the greatest world that this world has ever known, which is why we should never diminish or discard them. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you on this topic tonight. I'll be happy to take any questions if there are. Yes, ma'am.
This isn't a question, but I'm sitting here finding myself deeply offended by your character assassination of Anita Hill.
Let me give you the facts of Miss Hill, and I'm not making them up. I've never met her. You can go on the record and go back and look at all the confirmation proceedings. She claimed that Clarence Thomas, 8 years before he was being confirmed, made 2 comments in her presence that she interpreted as sexual harassment. One of those, she testified that she told a friend, and this friend testified that she had told her about these events in the summer of 1981. She was asked on the record to confirm those dates. It was June 1981. Her friend confirmed that that's when she told her about these events. Both in their testimony, written testimony, under oath. It was later, cross-examination found that she didn't go to work for Clarence Thomas and never met him until October 1981. So there's three events of her words that just don't add up. But the point isn't about Anita Hill so much. It's about the fact that 100 people testified for this man. 12 women that worked with both Anita Hill and 12 women that worked with Clarence Thomas, 8 of which worked both with Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas in both of their jobs. And all 12 of those ladies, including the other 8, said that they never saw a single time in the years they worked with either of them where Clarence Thomas said anything inappropriate to any woman, including Anita Hill. Now, Anita Hill may well have believed the things she said, but the fact that Clarence Thomas almost was not confirmed over one accusation with no corroboration. The only corroborating witness admitted later that it couldn't have been possible because Anita Hill didn't work for the man when she told him. My point is, he almost wasn't made a Supreme Court justice. Any person in this room, me equally, no question. If somebody in some meeting where I was alone with a person wants to make an accusation, they can make it. They can do it about you, they can do it about your children. And my point is, that shouldn't be the standard. The standard should be, is there evidence that actually those things occurred? And if it is, then that's valuable, that should be included. But what you'll find if you go back to the confirmation hearings with Clarence Thomas, and I didn't know him at the time at all, is that the left decided they couldn't stop his nomination, and there's a number of people that have admitted this. Anita Hill's as much as admitted it. I'll come to that in a second. This isn't about Anita Hill. I'm not trying to be, I believe she believes what she said. But the point is, no one else did. And yet this man almost did not become Supreme Court Justice. And that's a problem, because what we've learned since that time as a society is, when we don't like somebody, let's not waste the time to actually debate their skills, their capability, their position. Let's just destroy them. Because frankly, it's much faster. The press loves to print it. People tend not to look into things more deeply, but here's Anita Hill's own words, and you can go on. 1998, she's on the record. You can pull the video up and get the transcript. Meet the Press with Tim Russell. Tim asked her, Anita, you just testified on behalf of Bill Clinton regarding Paula Jones and all of these other ladies that have accused him, including the Monica Lewinsky event. Her comment was, I do that because Bill Clinton, the body of his work and the overall positions he has on women's rights and abortion and things of that nature, overwhelmed his bad judgments in dealing with women. Virtually saying, I didn't like Clarence Thomas. I didn't want him to be a Supreme Court justice, so I'm willing to say things to try and stop that. That's what I'm talking. We shouldn't allow that. Whether or not I agree with you or not on your position on X, I should have to debate you on X. And if I win and people agree with my view, great. If they agree with your view, great. But my decision to lie about you, because that's easier, that's what we have to get away from, because that's what we're doing more and more of today. We're allowing character assassination to get in the way of an honest debate on the topics.
Well, I guess the problem that I have is that you're telling me all of this, telling us all of this, that she definitely lied, etc. But I remember watching those hearings. I don't remember coming out of those with that opinion that she was a liar. I came out of it with the opinion that she was just completely trashed by the establishment. And now you're bringing up these other things that you're claiming are facts, and they may very well be, that I've never heard of. I never heard of her defending Bill Clinton's affair with Monica Lewinsky. But all of this seems to say Anita Hill was a liar, and I don't believe that. And she was assassinating a man's character. If you listened to those hearings, I know I did.
I did.
There was a lot of credible information, in my opinion, and in many other people's opinion, that was presented in those hearings. And in my opinion, he never should have been confirmed as a Supreme Court justice. Now, I don't have
Now,
facts
is that
behind-
because she felt that the two things he said to her made him unqualified, or just because you just don't agree with his judgment?
Let me go back. I don't have the facts behind me that you claim to have in what you just presented to us. So I can't really argue with what you're saying.
This is an argument.
Right.
It's not debate, he's speaking.
But-
No, your point is fair. Because I'm going to make a different point for you in a second.
Okay, well, I'm being asked not to continue
Well,
because.
yeah,
No,
you're
no.
going into a debate, this isn't a debate. The gentleman's here has his opinion, you don't agree with it, you don't have to.
But your comments are fair. Let me make it a little different, because this isn't, I'm not trying to say that Anita Hill, I don't know Anita Hill, and she may well have believed what she said, and some portion of it may have actually been true. If you go back on the record, I think you'll find, by the way, the good news is about all that is at the time, the polls showed that 70% of America did not believe her, and they did believe Justice Thomas. So that's a good thing. I mean, people made a judgment. But what I'm really troubled with is this movie that's now coming out. 'Cause let me give you some facts and you'll see it. I've seen the script. A young woman by the name of Wright is made a heroine in this movie, and it's make believe. I mean, if you go back, this is all the confirmation proceedings are all on the record. The documents are all there. She came up to support Anita Hill. Purportedly, she was going to say that Anita Hill had told her that these things had happened. The day she was subpoenaed to testify, her lawyer asked, again, on the record, she signed the document not to have to testify. And the reason he gave was, and these are in the conversations between Joe Biden, who's the committee chairman, that she will not be, this is her lawyer, she will not be a credible witness. And so she didn't testify. They gave her a release from the subpoena and she didn't testify. Okay, fine. This movie portrays her that the Republicans kept her from testifying. And it's make-believe. I mean, this movie's being run, HBO's saying, because it's a major story on sexual harassment. It isn't. 25-year-old confirmation hearing, one person made an accusation. My point is, this isn't healthy for us. Why aren't they making that Bill Clinton movie? I don't want to see either one of them. I don't think they should make it. We watch both of these in real life. But if HBO wants to hide behind the fact that sexual harassment is a major issue to be disclosed, oh my God. You had a president doing it in the Oval Office. But again, the point just is, we know that. I don't need to see that movie. We lived through it. Why are we dredging up this confirmation? And that's the point I'm getting. It's not Anita Hill. It's that we're trying to destroy people. There is, folks, I mean, you imagine Justice Scalia passed away just a few months ago. And within days, Clarence Thomas received over 1,000 death threats and public requests that hopes he dies so that he can be replaced by a liberal justice. Who does that? I mean, if a liberal justice was replaced by a conservative justice, I don't want somebody to die. I mean, they're a justice in the United States. We got to get away from that kind of stuff. That's really the point of it. Yes.
Question?
As gentleman back here is to follow up.
I'm concerned, we made a presentation about civility, and it was not political. But the first example you present is a political one. Do you have any examples of Republicans in their management of events in our
Well, I think we're watching it on TV every day. I'm appalled by what I'm seeing.
A balanced approach. I would prefer you say, you said it was not political, but again, you only gave the example of what the Democrats did to New York. We know that if both parties
It's a fair point.
are and live and, have this problem, I wish you would have said, here's an example of what a Republican party, the Democrats did to a Republican, here's an example of the opposite.
Fair point, fair point. I think you're right. The reason I used the Clarence Thomas is just merely, I tried to go back in time and figure out when did we start doing this to each other? And that seemed to be a time in my life when instead of respecting people, we decided, okay, we're not going to win this, so let's kill them. But you're right. I mean, I can't believe what I'm hearing at a presidential debate. And I'm talking to Republicans and Democrats, actually, I don't agree with Bernie Sanders, but he seems like an honest, nice man. Never met him, but he seems, and he's very respectful when he speaks, and he backs up his comments with his views. On the Republican side, I've been absolutely, I have to admit, I've laughed some nights just at how absurd it is, but it bothers me to think about these folks who want to be president, and they use this kind of language and lock it back. So your point is fair. I genuinely don't mean this to be either way. I think both sides do it. I think I've done it. I mean, I think I have sat and watched someone who I don't really care for get mistreated by the press or something, and I didn't say anything because the end for me justified the means, right? I wasn't happy with that person. I think though that we've got to start caring that we do treat people that way. Question? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Disregarding Justice Thomas and Anita Hill, is it fair to evaluate character, however, in evaluating people in public office?
I think you have to, sure. But I think we need to try and do it. I worry about my grandkids, your kids, my grandkids, that if they live in a world where just attacking them is okay, that what are we going to end up with? But if they act badly, if they behave badly, I absolutely think that should be taken into account. Yes, sir.
I have a question about civility in politics. We have consumer protection laws that bring severe penalties, including fines and jail time, for people that market fraudulently, that give us consumer products that do not work. And I'm baffled as to why that isn't true also in other political consumer venues like political campaigns. Why should it not be against the law to lie about your political opponent or to fabricate information about yourself? Why wouldn't that go a long way toward promoting more civility in politics?
Well, it's an interesting thought. I'm not sure. The one benefit we have as a society is freedom of speech. And I would worry that if we tried to, I'm not sure how you regulate that. I get your point, but I think
you do it on the basis of consumer protection. I mean, we don't allow freedom. Free speech does not include the freedom to lie about your product that you're selling or to lie about a competitor's product.
Yeah. I think though the problem, again, I'm not defending a politician, but I think, when they propose a budget that doesn't work, where do you draw the line in that? If it's I think one of the problems, I know in my, Joe, you've been in media your whole career, but in my lifetime, I remember when I used to get called by a reporter 25, 30 years ago, asking about something. And he or she would point out, do you know someone else that is knowledgeable about this that I can get a second credible opinion on this? And, at least I don't think you read as much nonsense 30 years ago in the press as you do today. And to me, I often see articles that have some unnamed source that said such and such. And, I really wonder whether the press does its job to, look at some of these statements that are blatantly silly. And the other issue is too, I think defamation is something that perhaps at some point we have to take more of a point like you're making, which is when someone just intentionally lies about someone and harms them. Our defamation statutes, I've experienced it in one time in my life. And when it was absolutely clear what they did, but the answer was, you'll win, but there'll be no damages. Because you're a public figure. And as a public figure, you're not entitled to damages for that.
That's because public figures are the ones that write the laws.
Well, yeah, no, I get it. I think though that I have sympathy for what you've said. I think ultimately though it comes down to all of us to.
Well, you understand, I'm not talking about budget, debates about budgets and the impact of a budget or something like that. I'm talking about outright manufactured laws, like the Swift boat ads against John Kerry. John Kerry was a legitimate war hero by anyone's estimation. And in the election, it's now been what, more than 10 years ago. This group of financiers got together and ran these absolute fraudulent stories about his service in Vietnam. And so I guess that's the thing I'm talking about now. I'll probably think of some things that were done.
Well, I would agree with that. I think that if a group does that kind of stuff, there should be a penalty. You should not be able to do that. You shouldn't even be able to, severely distort it. It's one thing to take somebody when, some of these ads, either way, they take a fact that's about that big and they turn it into, the guy should be electrocuted or she should be electrocuted, whoever it is. I don't think, and there's something that's documented. Somebody went out, made a commercial, paid for it, and they should have to be able to back up the substance of it if they're challenged. I don't disagree. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Dave, you use the word civility a lot of times in your talk. And one could argue that some of the best moments of this country's history was when we were not civil. For example, the fight for desegregation, the fight for women's rights, the fight to stop the war in Vietnam. I understand we should all be civil, but do you also see where at times we may have to be uncivil in order to correct wrongs in this world?
Maybe occasionally, but Martin Luther King was one of the most civil people in a very difficult situation, and he got his point across. I mean, I don't think protesting, I don't think standing up for what you believe in is being uncivil. But I think making stuff up about somebody. For instance, had somebody tried to destroy, and frankly, there probably were people doing this. I just wasn't around at the time. But if people were making up lies about Martin Luther King to try and make sure he wouldn't be heard, is that right? Yes.
Do you think that we as a society lack a true example of what a good, honest debate actually is? Because, I've seen footage of figures such as, William Buckley discussed with James Baldwin even more charged topics, such as Jim Crow laws and racism in America. And I've seen them do it with more civility than Republican candidates can discuss tax laws. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts on, or could give examples of, what are we being deprived of in the examples of what the debate actually is, aside from C-SPAN footage of mock trial.
Yeah, it's a good question, because I've tried to figure out, how much of it is our fault, just the viewers, because we pay attention, how much of it is the different networks that hold these debates and then wanting to make them exciting, to get a little more viewership. We've kind of lost the notion of when I was a kid, the evening news. It really was. Now, I'm sure it wasn't 100% accurate, but I think they tried to be. We were a little far away from that today. One thing that actually my wife mentioned that I shouldn't take credit for it. she said, well, it'd be kind of fun if in the future they would do the debates where you'd have 2 or 3 Democratic candidates and 2 or 3 Republican candidates in the same debate. Because it's kind of not all that helpful to just have 11 Republicans up there debating each other, and then some number of Democrats separately debating them, because it's those 2 views that would be more interesting to. I understand we have to choose a nominee, but I don't know what the answer to that is. But hopefully we can get to a reaction. But the Republican debates, in my view, have been an embarrassment for the most part. And I'm a Republican, so I'm not really proud of it. Yes, ma'am.
I have a 2-part question. The first being who you're supporting in this election, and the second being what you think of Buffett's support of Hillary Clinton.
Well, in my case, I supported Jeb Bush, so here we are. I think he's a good man. I don't blame him for being. I will say this: I do think there's more than 2 families in America that can run the country, but he's a good man, and but he obviously didn't do terribly well. Warren is a complex person. I know him well, and he's a complex person, so I'll leave it with that. So who am I going to support in the final analysis? I'm an absolute believer. My dad would roll over his grave if I didn't vote. But I know there's at least one person on the combined ballots today that I can't vote for. And he's from New York. I know him. I just, and not because, just because I don't believe in the tactics. I just don't think it's the right way to behave. And I would worry, and frankly, your question of character, I think, lends into that. I would worry that character flaw, if you will, when you're not happy you attack, could cause us to end up in a very, very serious problem. The one thing that is interesting today, whether you're liberal, conservative, moderate, a lot of people aren't happy with the way our government's working, and I get that. I probably share that view. Today there was a thing, probably irrelevant to this group, and it really doesn't matter to me, but the Pfizer merger that was called an inversion, which it would have been. They were quite open about it. The fact that government today issued a rule that killed that they know is illegal, but that by the time it gets to the courts, the deal would be dead anyway, so the merger got called off. That's a disturbing issue. And that's not an Obama issue. It's the fact that we have an administration and a Congress that can't do simple things that they know need to get done. The corporate tax code needs to get fixed. And it's not about whether you and I pay more or less taxes. It's about making businesses competitive globally. And there's been bills passed around that could easily be approved. They're not magic, but they won't get together and do it. And I think that's really frustrating. No matter which side you're on, that's their job. And when there's something like that, that's really troublesome to me, because I don't have any issue with but fix it, get it right, and they're not. And you can decide that since the Republicans have the House and Senate and the Democrats have the presidency, you can try to blame one or the other. I think they're both at blame, because there are issues out there that they both know there's answers to. But I'll give you an example. In 30 years of dealing with Congress, Democrats, Republicans, both sides, because we're in 13 states, so we had to deal with both sides of them. And this had nothing to do with our business, but every time I met with the Congressman, I talked to them about some of the problems with our welfare system. Because my wife and I get very involved with kids, and particularly kids of diverse backgrounds. I've never had a congressman not say to me that they recognize the system is badly broken. This isn't about saving money, it's about using the money effectively to help people. But they won't fix it. One side wants to blame the other if the other one tries. People are getting tired of that. And so you see somebody like a Trump and others can get a lot of traction when people are frustrated. Yes, sir.
Thank you for coming to Stanford. In the press release, there's an announcement about your issue of climate change. Can you comment on civility amongst our elected officials and the issue of climate change?
Well, climate change is something I really care a lot about, and this is on both sides of the aisle. I would put a box in both houses. This is an issue we really need to be spending time and money on, and understanding it, and really thinking about what do we do about it. And it's become totally political. I mean, I'm in the energy industry. I've spent most of my life on the environmental side of the energy industry. We've done absolutely nothing meaningful in the last 20 years on this topic, other than argue about it and litigate over things and do token stuff. And I don't know what the answer is, by the way. I don't, yes, we should minimize where we can economically any type of pollution into our environment. But because no one's really thinking about the ramifications of, okay, if we try to slow it down, climate change, is that, if we put trillions of dollars to do that, is that a better answer than trying to spend the trillions of dollars adapting to it? I don't know the answer. But somebody needs to think about that, because you're not going to get to spend 15 or 20 trillion dollars too many ways globally. And if in fact it's really unreasonable to get China and India and some of the developing countries to take it as seriously as we would like them to, and it's understandable to an extent. We polluted for 160 years, got our economy to be the leader in the world. We think everybody else should now not pollute and spend the money that we didn't spend. I mean, it's not like they're totally unreasonable in their views, but if in fact we're never going to really get to where we can get everybody on board to slow down climate change, then maybe we should be spending more time thinking about adaptation. But we're not doing either. I mean, realistically, it's a big sideshow, and it's probably the issue over time that can really make a difference in our lives. But we're arguing about, we're not looking at all the science. There's been quite a few ice ages before man was on the planet. We obviously didn't cause those. Now, I'm not saying that we're not accelerating climate change today. Data would infer we clearly are. But if it's going to happen anyway, are we better off preparing for it and trying to adapt to it over 100 or 150 years? Or are we, do we really think we can? I don't think anybody believes we can stop it, because it's the natural cycle of our atmosphere. But if we can slow it down, is slowing it down worth enough to spend all the money doing that? Or again, I don't have an answer for you, but that's why people are frustrated. I don't think that issue alone necessarily, a lot of people just don't know the depth of this issue, but that's what our leaders should be thinking of, and really spending time trying to honestly, sort out what do we do, and they're not. I can tell you, I'm very involved in that topic, and they have a lot of great seminars around it, but there's not much happening.
One more question.
Yes, ma'am.
Two quick things. I welcome what you told us tonight. I think I would welcome also if you would submit that to major newspapers, especially when this HBO series or special comes out, because the point of view is very well taken. And when I watched the hearings years ago, I was embarrassed for women. I thought it was a travesty of the system, and it really felt like they were trying to skewer a good man. That's one thing. And the other thing, so I'd like to see you submit to newspapers, perhaps to be published as an op-ed. The other thing is, do you have any comments on the uncivilized influence of billionaires like George Soros?
Yeah, the latter one, I appreciate your comment, but the latter one about, rich people trying to influence things, there are those that would say, I'm one of those people. I mean, by doing this. I really don't have a, Warren Buffett and I worked together for 11 years, and we disagreed on a number of topics. But the one thing I'll say is it was always, we were having dinner together talking about it. And I convinced him a little, and he convinced me a little. But I think people should be able to express their views, and I think if it's done honestly, that Mr. Soros can't buy my vote or your vote, or Warren can't buy somebody's, or I can't buy somebody. If it's done honestly, I can impact you and maybe think about something maybe. and as they can they. But I think only if we allow them to spread untruths aggressively and consistently. And that's really, you know, I appreciate you all taking the time to listen to somebody you have no reason to listen to. And because I think this is how, whether or not you agree with me or not on any of these topics, we need to talk about it. You know, I don't dislike anybody in this room, whether you agree with me or not. I have no reason to. But we're, as a society, we're getting so much inside of ourselves, and it is a busy time anymore. I mean, you know, I'm thrilled that you guys would take the time to come and spend an hour to do this, because everybody's got a lot on their plate, and that's part of our problem. Is that we hear something. You know, it used to be, my dad always said, "Dang it, people don't even read the whole article." You know, I don't even think people finish the headline. And so we, you know, hopefully we'll just continue to try and force ourselves to be more so. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, David. I've been coming to these discussions month after month, and tonight we had evidence. Civility works. We had difference of opinion in this room. It got a little tense. Everybody was civil. God bless the city of Stanford. Thank you for coming.